What if I told you everything you thought you knew about the beginning of Snoop Dogg was wrong? Forget the stories of gangster anthems born on the streets. The truth is quieter, more personal, and it's been a family secret until today. Before we reveal the moment that changed music forever, do me a solid, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You are not going to want to miss the untold stories we're bringing you. The Long Beach sun in '88 wasn't gentle. It was a weight. It baked the color out of the houses on 21st Street and shimmered off the hot hoods of the lowriders cruising down Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue. It was the kind of heat that made things feel slow, permanent, and in the middle of all that slow, permanent heat was my cousin, Calvin Broadus. Skinny, quiet Calvin, who seemed to glide through the neighborhood instead of walking, soaking it all in with those observant eyes of his. Most folks now see the icon, the Dogg father, the larger-than-life personality that filled stadiums and screens for decades. But I remember the kid, the one who'd rather be in the back of the classroom doodling in a notebook than out front holding court. He was lanky, all arms and legs, and had a way of making himself seem smaller than he was, a shadow absorbing the light and the noise around him. He didn't crave attention. In fact, he'd usually duck it. Our house was a hub, always full of noise, aunties cooking, uncles arguing about the Lakers, and the constant thrum of the block. Music was everywhere. The Gap Band, Cameo, a little early NWA starting to rattle trunks. It was the soundtrack to our lives, the rhythm you moved to without thinking. But Calvin, he seemed to have a different rhythm inside him, one that was just for him, silent and deep. He spent hours in his room, not listening to music, but with a pencil in his hand. We all thought he was just drawing, creating fantasy worlds, on paper to escape the sometimes harsh reality of our world. He'd fill page after page with intricate drawings, characters with long limbs and expressive faces. It was his thing. We let him be, figured it was better than him getting caught up in the other stuff the neighborhood had to offer. One afternoon, I went into his room to borrow a cassette. I think it was EPMD. He wasn't there, probably out playing ball at the park. The room was neat, almost sparse, but on his little desk, under a history textbook, was a simple, black and white composition notebook. It wasn't his usual sketchbook. This one was filled not with pictures, but with words, tightly packed, carefully written lines of text. Curiosity got the better of me, a choice that would unknowingly light a fuse that would ignite a global phenomenon. I picked it up, the cover cool against my hands, and felt a strange sense of trespass, like I was about to look directly into his soul. The air in the room was still, thick with the afternoon heat and the scent of pencil shavings and paper. It felt like a sacred space. I hesitated for a moment, my thumb on the edge of the cover. This was his private world, the thoughts he kept behind those quiet eyes. Part of me knew I should put it down, walk away, and just grab the tape I came for. But a stronger part, a feeling I still can't fully explain, told me I needed to see what was inside. I needed to understand the silent music playing in my cousin's head, so I opened it. The first page was dated, the handwriting precise. It wasn't a diary, not in the traditional sense. There were no Dear Diary entries. It was something else entirely. It was a collection of poems, stanzas and verses that painted pictures of our streets, of the people, the struggles, the quiet, hopes that lived in the cracks of the concrete. The words flowed with a natural, effortless cadence. He wrote about the way the palm trees looked like tired old men leaning against the sky. He wrote about the jingle of the ice cream truck being the only music that could make everyone on the block smile at the same time. It was the world I knew, but seen through his eyes, felt brand new, more profound. I spent maybe an hour in that room, completely captivated. The sun started to set, casting long orange glows through the window blinds, striping the pages with light and shadow. Each page was a revelation, a testament to a talent he was hiding from everyone, maybe even from himself. It was raw, honest, and more powerful than any rap I'd heard on the radio. There was no swagger, no posturing. It was pure observation, a narrative woven from the fabric of our daily lives. He captured the slang, the rhythm of our speech, the weariness in our parents' faces, and the fierce loyalty of our friendships. This wasn't just writing. This was testimony. This was the soul of Long Beach, distilled into ink on a cheap piece of paper. I closed the notebook, my mind racing and my heart pounding. This was too good to stay hidden in a dusty room. The world, or at least the block, needed to hear this. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it, the weight of my discovery settling on me. The quiet, skinny kid down the hall wasn't just a doodler, he was a poet. And I knew, right then and there, I couldn't let him keep it a secret. A couple of days later, I found the right moment. We were on the porch, watching the evening settle in, the sky turning a deep purple. The heat of the day was finally breaking, replaced by a cool breeze that rustled the leaves. Calvin was quiet, as usual, just watching the cars go by. I decided to be direct, no beating around the bush. "I read your notebook," I said, my voice low but steady. His reaction was instant. His head snapped in my direction, his laid-back posture vanishing. He went from relaxed to rigid in a heartbeat, his eyes wide with a mix of panic and anger. "What? Why would you do that, man?" he shot back, his voice a sharp whisper. He looked around, as if to make sure no one else had heard. The idea of his private thoughts being exposed clearly terrified him. "Calvin, that's not just scribbling," I told him, trying to keep my own excitement in check. "That's poetry. It's real. The way you put words together, man, it's a gift." He just shook his head, looking down at his worn-out sneakers. He was shutting down, retreating back into that shell of his. "It's nothing," he mumbled. "Just messing around. Forget you saw it." But I couldn't forget. The images his words had created were burned into my mind. I saw the potential, a massive, glowing star that he was trying to hide under a blanket. "No, I'm not going to forget it," I pressed on. "You're writing about our lives, about this place, in a way nobody else is. People need to hear this stuff. It's more real than half the songs on the radio." He looked genuinely distressed, almost pained. "It's not for people to hear, D-Mac. It's just for me. It's not supposed to be music." That was the word that hung in the air between us. Music. He saw it as a private journal, a collection of thoughts. I heard it as a collection of lyrical blueprints, songs waiting to be born. The disconnect between us was as wide as the street, in front of us. I tried a different angle, appealing to his perspective. "Think about it," I said. "All the stuff you write about. The struggle, trying to find your way, the good and bad of the city. Don't you think other people feel that too? Your words could be a voice for them. For all of us." He was silent for a long time, just staring out into the twilight, the sounds of the neighborhood, a distant hum. He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "It's different when you say it out loud," he said softly. "It makes it real. I'm not a rapper." He said the word rapper like it was a foreign concept, something other people were, something he couldn't possibly be. The confidence that the world would later see was nowhere to be found. In its place was a deep, paralyzing self-doubt. Knew pushing him too hard would only make him lock the notebook, and his talent, away forever. I had to be smart about it. The seed was planted, but it needed the right conditions to grow. He was protective of his words because they were honest, and that honesty made him feel vulnerable. He hadn't yet learned how to turn that vulnerability into strength. "All right, man," I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "I won't bring it up again. It's your stuff." He gave me a skeptical look, not quite believing me. The trust between us was strained. He had let me see a part of him that no one else had, and in his mind, I had betrayed that by even speaking of it. It was a wound I had to be careful not to deepen. The conversation was over, but the idea wasn't. For the rest of the evening, an awkward silence sat between us. We were cousins, we were practically brothers, but a new tension had entered our relationship. I had seen behind the curtain, and he was terrified of the world seeing it too. I had to prove to him that his words weren't a source of weakness, but of power. Later that night, long after the house was quiet, an idea started to form in my head. He said his words weren't music. Fine. But what if they were? What if all they needed was a beat? He was a poet, and I was just a guy from the neighborhood, but I knew music, and I knew a guy with a beat machine. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the plan solidifying in my mind. I couldn't force him to become an artist, but I could show him what his art could be. I would create the bridge between his private page and the public speaker. It was a gamble. It could push him away for good, or it could be the spark that lit the fire. I decided it was a risk worth taking. The next day, I rode my bike over to my friend Jamal's house on the other side of town. Jamal was a self-proclaimed electronics wizard, his garage a chaotic maze of wires, circuit boards, and half-disassembled speakers. More importantly, he had a Roland TR-808 drum machine, a dusty but functional piece of equipment that he'd bought off a guy for next to nothing. It was our neighborhood's key to making beats. I found Jamal soldering a circuit board, the air thick with the smell of burning metal. I explained my situation, leaving out Calvin's name at first. "I got these words," I said. "Real powerful stuff. But the person who wrote them doesn't think they're songs. I need a beat, something simple, something with a groove to prove him wrong. Something smooth, like a Sunday drive." Jamal pushed his glasses up his nose, his interest piqued. "What kind of groove?" he asked, putting down his soldering iron. I tried to describe the feel of Calvin's poetry. "It's not angry," I explained. "It's observational, laid back. It's got that Long Beach feel. Slow, sunny, but with a little bit of that grit underneath." We spent the next hour messing around with the 808. We dialed in a simple pattern. A deep, resonant kick, a sharp snare that snapped right on the 2 and 4, and a ticking, hypnotic hi-hat. There was no fancy programming, no complex layers. It was just a raw, hypnotic rhythm, a blank canvas. I knew it had to be simple. Something that wouldn't overpower the words but would give them a spine, a pulse. I recorded about 5 minutes of it onto a blank cassette tape. Armed with the tape, I went back home to face Calvin. I found him on the front steps, just listening to the sounds of the street. I sat down next to him and held out the cassette. "I have a proposition for you," I said, my voice calm and even. He eyed the tape suspiciously, his guard immediately going up. "I told you I don't want to talk about it." "You don't have to talk. You just have to listen," I replied. "This is a one-time deal, a bargain. I had my boy make a simple beat. I want you to try reading just one of your poems over it. Just once. If you think it sounds stupid, if you hate it, I swear on everything I love, I will throw this tape away and never mention your notebook again." He stared at the tape, then at me, weighing his options. He could see I wasn't going to let it go easily. The offer of eternal silence on the subject was probably the most tempting part. It was a way to finally get me off his back. He was caught between his desire for privacy and his cousin's relentless, annoying belief in him. Finally, with a heavy, dramatic sigh, he took the tape. "Fine," he said, the word clipped. "One time, and then you drop it forever, and nobody else can hear it." I agreed instantly. "Deal. Just you, me, and a tape recorder in the garage. No one else." It felt like I was negotiating a peace treaty. The stakes felt incredibly high. We're at the turning point of this story, the moment that could change everything. If you're enjoying this glimpse into music history, do me a favor and hit that like button. It lets me know you want more untold stories like this, and drop a comment below letting me know who your favorite old-school rapper is. Now, let's get back to the garage. The garage was our chosen studio. It was dusty, cluttered with old furniture, lawn equipment, and boxes of forgotten memories. It smelled of oil and old paper. The acoustics were terrible, but the privacy was perfect. We had an old boombox with a record function, the kind with the 2 cassette decks. It wasn't professional, but it was all we had. I put the beat tape in, one deck and a blank tape in the other. I handed Calvin the microphone, a cheap plastic thing that came with the boombox. He held it awkwardly, like it was a foreign object he'd never seen before. He stood in the middle of the garage, surrounded by junk, looking skinnier and more vulnerable than ever. He pulled his notebook from his back pocket, his security blanket. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration, looking for the right piece. He was stalling, his anxiety palpable in the stuffy garage air. "Just pick one, man," I said gently. "Anyone. It doesn't matter." He finally landed on a page, taking a deep breath. I looked at him, ready to press play, to call his bluff and hold him to our bargain. He was on the edge of a cliff he didn't even know existed. His entire future, the Snoop Dogg the world would come to know, was balanced on this single moment of teenage reluctance and a cousin's stubborn faith. It was time to see if he would fall or fly. I pressed the play and record buttons simultaneously. A low hiss filled the air for a second, and then the beat kicked in. That simple, hypnotic 8/8 groove started to pulse through the dusty garage, bouncing off the concrete floor and wooden rafters. It was a steady, unassuming rhythm. The stage was set. I looked at Calvin and nodded. Go for it. He stared down at his notebook, his knuckles white. He started to read, his voice quiet, hesitant. He was just reciting the words on the page, just as he would have for a class presentation. It was stiff, disconnected from the beat. The words were brilliant, describing a summer evening on the block, but his delivery had no soul. It sounded wrong, like he was fighting the music instead of joining it. Stop, stop, I said, hitting the pause button. The sudden silence was deafening. He looked up, a frustrated, I told you this was stupid expression on his face. You're reading it, Calvin, I told him. Don't read it, feel the beat, let it get in your head. The words already have a rhythm. You just have to find where they fit. Find the pocket. He didn't understand. What pocket? He asked, genuinely confused. It's a feeling, I tried to explain, probably poorly. Don't rush the words. Lean back on them. Let them ride the beat. Don't chase it. Try it again. Forget your reading. Just talk to me. Tell me the story. I hit play again, the beat dropping back in, patient and steady. He took another deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and started again. This time, something was different. He wasn't just reading, he was listening. He started to sway a little, a subconscious nod of his head matching the hi-hat. His voice was still quiet, but it wasn't stiff anymore. He started to find the spaces between the snare hits. Then, it happened. About 4 bars in, he stopped trying to force the words and just let them flow. That iconic delivery, the one the world would later recognize, was born in that dusty garage. It was smooth, melodic, almost conversational. He wasn't rapping on the beat. He was rapping inside it. He was weaving his words through the rhythm, becoming part of the music itself. The change was breathtaking. He was no longer shy, quiet Calvin. A new persona was emerging, right before my eyes. He was confident, cool, in complete control. His voice, naturally mellow, was the perfect instrument for the stories he was telling. He wasn't just describing the scene. He was making us feel it, see it, live it. It was effortless, authentic, and utterly captivating. I stood there by the boombox, mesmerized. I felt like an archaeologist who had just brushed the dust off a priceless artifact. The words I had loved on the page were now alive, breathing, infused with a charisma I never knew he possessed. He wasn't even looking at the notebook anymore. His eyes were closed, and he was just rhyming from memory, lost in the sound. He went through the entire poem, a 2-minute masterpiece of lyrical storytelling. He ended the last line right as I was about to fade the beat out. When the tape clicked off, the silence returned, but this time it was different. It was filled with the energy of what had just happened. It was the silence after a lightning strike. Calvin opened his eyes. He looked dazed, like he was coming out of a trance. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of pride in his eyes. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. "How was that?" he asked, his voice back to its normal quiet tone, but with a new undercurrent of excitement. I just stared at him for a second, a huge grin spreading across my face. I rewound the tape, my hands fumbling with the buttons. "How was it?" I repeated, my voice full of awe. "Listen for yourself." I pressed play, and his creation, his first real track, filled the garage. The poet had become a rapper. We both listened, in stunned silence. Hearing his own voice, so confident and smooth, coming out of those cheap boombox speakers, seemed to shock him more than anyone. He heard it too. He heard the magic. He wasn't just Calvin anymore. He was an MC. And in my hand, I held the proof, a C60 cassette tape containing the secret origin of Snoop Dogg. For the next day, that cassette tape felt like a state secret. I kept my promise to Calvin and didn't play it for anyone. But it was killing me. It felt selfish to keep something so revolutionary to myself. It was like discovering fire and not telling the rest of the cavemen. This sound, this style, was something the world needed, and it started with our neighborhood. My friend Warren G., who lived just a few blocks away, was always on the hunt for new sounds. He was already a talented DJ with an incredible ear for music. He was always mixing, always creating, always trying to find that next thing. I knew, if anyone would understand the importance of what was on that tape, it would be him. I decided to bend the rules of my deal with Calvin, just a little. I found Warren in his own garage. It was a much more organized version of a studio than ours. He was surrounded by records, a turntable, and a sampler. I told him I had something he needed to hear, but I made him swear not to tell anyone where he got it. He was intrigued. I popped the tape in his deck, which was hooked up to some real speakers, not just a boombox. I hit play. The 808 beat filled the space, and then Calvin's voice dropped in. Warren's reaction was immediate. His head, which had been bobbing to the beat, froze. His eyes widened. He leaned closer to the speaker, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was completely captivated, listening with an intensity that only a true music head could possess. When the track ended, Warren was silent for a full minute. He just stared at the tape deck. Then he looked at me, his eyes blazing with excitement. "Who is that?" he demanded. His flow. It's like nothing I've ever heard. It's like he's not even trying. But it's perfect. Run that back. We listened to it again, and again, and a fourth time. I finally cracked and told him, "It's my cousin, Calvin." Warren was floored. Skinny Calvin? No way. To him, Calvin was just the quiet kid who was good at basketball and drawing. He couldn't connect that kid with the impossibly cool, smooth-talking MC on the tape. I told him the whole story, the notebook, the bargain, the garage session. Warren understood immediately. "This isn't just a demo, D-Mac," he said, his voice serious. "This is a new sound. We have to get this to Dre." At the time, Dr. Dre was already a legend from NWA, and the idea of getting his attention seemed impossible, a dream. But hearing Warren say it made it feel, for the first time, like a real possibility. Of course, word got back to Calvin. One of Warren's friends mentioned hearing an incredible new track, and the description was too specific. Calvin confronted me, and he was furious. "I trusted you," he yelled, angrier than I'd ever seen him. "That was our deal, man. Me and you. Now the whole neighborhood's gonna hear it." He felt exposed, betrayed. The argument was heated. He felt like I had taken his most private thoughts and turned them into neighborhood gossip. I tried to explain that this wasn't gossip. This was a claim. "They don't think it's stupid, Calvin," I argued back. "They think it's brilliant. Warren thinks you're the future." But in his anger and fear, he couldn't hear the compliment. But then something shifted. As his anger subsided, the reality of what I was saying started to sink in. Warren G., whose musical opinion he respected, thought he was the future. His friends hadn't laughed. They were blown away. The validation, even though it came from a place of betrayal, began to work its magic. A tiny seed of confidence had been planted. He was still mad at me, but the fear in his eyes was being replaced by something else. Curiosity. The question of what if had been answered. What if someone heard his words? The result wasn't ridicule, it was reverence. He had seen a glimpse of his own potential, reflected in the eyes of his peers. The anger faded over the next few days. He never explicitly said he forgave me, but we fell back into our old rhythm. The difference was, something had been unlocked. The poet knew he was a rapper now. He hadn't sought out an audience, but an audience had found him, and they wanted more. The garage door had been opened, and there was no closing it now. Looking back now, across all the decades, the platinum albums, the global tours, and the cultural icon status, it all comes back to that dusty garage. It comes back to a quiet kid and a hidden notebook. The world knows Snoop Dogg, the superstar. But the foundation of that star was built on the vulnerability of a teenage poet from Long Beach. That first rap, the one on that worn-out cassette, tape, was the genesis. It wasn't about money, cars, or fame. It was about finding the poetry in the everyday, the rhythm in the ordinary. It was about the way the setting sun hit the liquor store sign, the sound of kids playing in the street, the feeling of being young and uncertain in a world that was both beautiful and dangerous. People talk about his effortless flow, that signature, melodic delivery that changed the game. But that flow didn't come from trying to be a gangster. It came from the natural cadence of his poetry. He wasn't trying to be hard. He was trying to be honest. And in that honesty, he found a style that was more authentic and cooler than any manufactured persona could ever be. That first session was a lesson. It taught him that his unique perspective, the things he saw and felt that made him feel different and quiet, was actually his greatest strength. His support system, starting with me, his stubborn cousin, and then Warren, and later Dr. Dre, didn't create his talent. We just helped him find the courage to share it. We held up a mirror and showed him the artist that was already there. The obstacles were real. His own shyness was the biggest hurdle. He was terrified of being judged, of being seen. Overcoming that fear was a bigger battle than any rap beef. It was the internal struggle of an artist finding his voice, learning that the things that make you vulnerable are the very things that make you great and allow you to connect with millions of people. Every time I hear one of his classic tracks, I can still hear the echo of that first poem. Beneath the G-Funk production and the confident swagger, the soul of that observant kid is still there. He's still painting pictures with words, still telling the story of his world with a rhythm that is uniquely his own. That's the truth that gets lost in the legend. So many stories in music are about sudden, explosive success. But Snoop's story, the real story, began much more quietly. It started with words on a page, with a cousin who wouldn't take no for an answer, and with the courage to put a poem to a simple 808 beat. It wasn't an act of aggression. It was an act of expression. That is the untold story of Snoop Dogg's first rap. It wasn't a rap. It was a poem. It wasn't born in the streets. It was born in his heart. The truth isn't about a gangster finding his voice, but a poet finding his rhythm. And knowing that, knowing the quiet truth behind the icon, makes his entire legacy even more profound. The journey from Calvin Broadus Jr. to the Dogg Father wasn't just about music. It was about personal growth. It was about a quiet young man, learning to embrace the powerful voice he had been hiding from the world. It was about discovering that true strength doesn't come from being the loudest in the room, but from being the most honest. His entire career is a testament to the power of authenticity. He brought the specific flavor of Long Beach to the entire world, and it resonated globally because it was real. It started with real observations, real feelings, written down in a simple composition notebook, by a kid who saw the world in a way no one else did. He never lost that. Through all the fame and evolution, the core of his artistry remains that of a storyteller, a street-smart poet with a flow as smooth as the California dusk. He found a way to be both larger than life and deeply personal, and that duality is what makes him an enduring legend. And that's the real story, the one we kept in the family for all these years. What do you think now that you know the truth? Does it change how you hear his music? Let me know your real, honest thoughts in the comments below. And please, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button so we can keep bringing these hidden histories to light. Thanks for listening.